She fell for the CEO who destroyed her family. But nothing could prepare her for the truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew. What starts as a reluctant partnership to save her company quickly turns into something far more dangerous and unexpected. As secrets from the past come to light, she discovers that the man she's working with isn't just guilty. He's been a victim too. With a hidden conspiracy threatening to take them both down, can they expose the truth before it's too late? Or will the weight of their past betrayals tear them apart forever? What happens when love collides with revenge, and both are on the line? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sarah Maxwell's office, matching her somber mood. She stood there, her reflection ghostly in the glass, as she clutched another rejection letter in her trembling hands. The piece of paper represented the 20th potential investor who had turned down her plea for help. Sarah's eyes drifted to the family photo on her desk, her father's warm smile frozen in time. It had been just 6 weeks since his sudden passing, but it felt like yesterday. The empty chair behind his massive mahogany desk seemed to mock her efforts to keep Maxwell Industries alive. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, touching the frame gently. "I'm trying everything I can." The company's financial reports lay scattered across her desk, each page telling the same story. Maxwell Industries was bleeding money. The company her father had built from the ground up was crumbling, and Sarah felt powerless to stop it. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, breaking through her thoughts. "Miss Maxwell, there's a call for you on line 1. It's Richard Gray from Gray Enterprises." Sarah's stomach clenched at the name. Richard Gray. The man whose company had systematically destroyed several of their major contracts last year, leading to their current financial crisis. Her father had never recovered from that blow. Taking a deep breath, Sarah picked up the phone. "Sarah Maxwell speaking." "Miss Maxwell." Richard's voice was deep and controlled, every bit as cold as she had imagined. "I'll get straight to the point. I'm aware of your company's current situation, and I have a proposition for you." Sarah's fingers tightened around the phone. "What kind of proposition, Mr. Gray?" "One that could save Maxwell Industries." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm prepared to inject $50 million into your company, enough to clear your debts and provide working capital for the next 2 years. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. $50 million. It was exactly what they needed, but years of business experience had taught her that nothing came without strings attached. "And what would you want in return?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "2 things. First, Gray Enterprises would become a 40% shareholder in Maxwell Industries." He paused again, and Sarah could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Second, I would personally oversee the company's restructuring, working alongside you." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Work alongside Richard Gray? The man who had contributed to her father's downfall? Her free hand curled into a fist. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you want to help the company you helped destroy?" "Business isn't personal, Miss Maxwell," Richard replied smoothly. "Your company has valuable patents and an excellent research department. With proper management, it could be profitable again. This is simply good business." Sarah walked to her father's old desk, running her fingers along the smooth wood. The company employed over 300 people, families that depended on their jobs. If Maxwell Industries went under, they would all suffer. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. 24 hours. The offer expires tomorrow at noon." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. "I'll need to review the details with my lawyers. Of course, I'll have the paperwork sent over immediately." Richard's tone remained professional, detached. Think carefully, Miss Maxwell. This may be your last chance to save your father's legacy. After the call ended, Sarah sank into her father's chair, her mind whirling with possibilities and fears. The leather still held a hint of his favorite cologne, and tears pricked at her eyes as she remembered his words. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we have to make for others, not ourselves. She spent hours poring over the contract with her legal team. The terms were fair, surprisingly so. Grey Enterprises would become a major shareholder, but Sarah would retain controlling interest. Richard Grey would join as co-CEO for 2 years, with clearly defined powers and limitations. As midnight approached, Sarah stood at the windows again, watching the city lights twinkle through the rain. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her heart. Working with Richard Grey felt like a betrayal of her father's memory. But letting the company fail, that would be the greater betrayal. Her phone buzzed with another message from the HR department. 3 more employees had submitted their resignations, afraid of going down with the sinking ship. Sarah thought of Maria in accounting, who was putting her daughter through college, and old Joe in maintenance, just 3 years from retirement. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and typed a message to Richard Grey. "I accept your offer. Send the final contracts tomorrow morning." The response came almost immediately. "Wise decision, Miss Maxwell. I look forward to our partnership." Sarah set the phone down and walked to her father's photo again. "I hope you can forgive me, Dad," she whispered. "But I have to save what you built, even if it means working with the enemy." She gathered her things, her movements mechanical. Tomorrow, Richard Grey would walk into these offices not as an enemy, but as a partner. The thought made her stomach turn, but she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She was Sarah Maxwell, and she would do whatever it took to protect her father's legacy, even if it meant making a deal with the devil himself. As she turned off the lights in her office, Sarah caught her reflection in the window one last time. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, harder, more determined. She would need that strength in the days to come, because working with Richard Grey would test every ounce of her resolve. For now, she had done what needed to be done. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but at least Maxwell Industries would live to fight another day. That would have to be enough. Sarah's heels clicked against the marble floor of Grey Enterprises headquarters, each step echoing her growing anxiety. The security guard escorted her through a maze of sleek corridors until they reached the top floor. Everything about the building screamed power and wealth, from the floor-to-ceiling windows to the modern art pieces that probably cost more than her annual salary. "Miss Maxwell," a polished receptionist greeted her. "Mr. Grey is expecting you in the main boardroom." Sarah smoothed down her navy blazer and checked her reflection in a nearby glass panel. Her shoulder-length brown hair was neatly styled, and she'd chosen her most professional outfit for this meeting. She refused to let Richard Grey intimidate her, even if her heart was racing. The boardroom doors opened silently, revealing a space that could have come straight from a luxury magazine. A massive table of polished mahogany dominated the room, surrounded by leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. And there he stood, Richard Grey. Sarah's first thought was that pictures didn't do him justice. Tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he emanated an aura of control that made the spacious room feel smaller. His dark hair was precisely styled, and his steel-grey eyes assessed her with calculated interest. At 35 years old, he looked every bit the powerful CEO he was. "Miss Maxwell," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Welcome to Grey Enterprises." He gestured to a chair. "Please, have a seat." Sarah lifted her chin and walked forward, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. "Mr. Grey, she replied coolly, taking the offered seat. "Let's get straight to business, shall we?" A slight smile touched his lips as he sat across from her. Direct, just like your father. The mention of her father made Sarah's jaw clench. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't pretend you knew him." "But I did know him," Richard responded, his expression unchanging. "Better than you might think. Yes, well enough to help destroy everything he built." Sarah shot back, her professional facade cracking slightly. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating grey eyes. "Is that what you believe happened?" "It's what I know happened," Sarah replied. "Your company's hostile takeover of our main supplier forced us into that terrible contract. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Business is rarely as simple as it appears, Miss Maxwell." Richard opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents. "But we're not here to discuss the past. We're here to secure your company's future." Sarah watched as he spread out the papers, each one detailed with graphs and projections. Despite her antipathy toward the man, she couldn't help but notice how methodical and organized he was. "The terms we discussed," he continued, "involve more than just financial investment. Maxwell Industries needs a complete restructuring to survive in today's market." "And you're just the man to do it?" Sarah couldn't keep the sarcasm from her voice. "Yes," he replied simply. "I am. Your company has valuable assets, patents, research facilities, skilled employees, but its management structure is outdated and its market strategy is inefficient." He slid a document towards her. "This outlines the integration plan. We'll need to work closely together, daily, in fact. You know your company's strengths and its people. I know how to make it profitable again." Sarah's heart sank as she reviewed the document. Working with Richard Gray every day? The thought made her stomach turn. But as she looked at the carefully detailed plan, she couldn't deny its potential. Every aspect had been considered, from resource allocation to employee retention. "And if I refuse to work directly with you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Then the deal is off," Richard stated flatly. "I don't invest in companies I can't help guide, especially not ones in Maxwell Industries' current situation." Sarah stood up abruptly, walking to the windows. The city stretched out below her, and somewhere out there was her father's company. Her company now, teetering on the brink of collapse. 300 employees depending on her to make the right decision. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, turning back to face him. The truth this time. Richard stood as well, his tall frame casting a shadow in the morning light. "Because Maxwell Industries deserves a second chance. Because those 300 people deserve to keep their jobs." He paused, meeting her gaze steadily. "And because some mistakes deserve a chance at redemption." Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more closely. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker behind his controlled expression. Regret? Pain? But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Fine," she said finally, returning to her seat. "I'll agree to your terms. But let's be clear, this is a business arrangement only. I'm not interested in friendship or making peace with the past." "Understood," Richard replied, pushing the contract toward her. "Shall we make it official?" As Sarah picked up the pen, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to find another solution. But there was no other solution. This was her only chance to save her father's legacy. She signed her name with a steady hand, then pushed the document back across the table. Richard's signature joined hers moments later, the scratch of his pen seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Welcome to our new partnership, Miss Maxwell," Richard said, extending his hand. Sarah hesitated for a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm and professional, but the brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her arm. She pulled back quickly, gathering her things. "I'll have my office send over the current operational reports," she said, standing. "When do you want to start?" "Tomorrow," Richard replied. 8 o'clock sharp. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Sarah nodded curtly and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Mr. Gray." He looked up from the papers he was already reviewing. "Yes?" "If this is some kind of game, or if you do anything to further damage my company." She left the threat unspoken. "I understand your distrust, Miss Maxwell," he replied calmly. "I look forward to proving it unfounded." Sarah left without another word, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor as she headed for the elevator. Only when she was alone in its mirrored confines did she allow herself to release a shaky breath. She had just agreed to work side by side with Richard Gray, the man she held responsible for her father's downfall. Every day she would have to face him, work with him, pretend she didn't despise him. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped out into the lobby, her head high and her expression composed. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with it. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Sarah sat rigidly in her chair, her fingers drumming against the stack of financial reports in front of her. 2 weeks had passed since she'd agreed to work with Richard Gray, and each day brought new contradictions that left her feeling increasingly unsettled. She watched as Richard moved around the room, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair as he wrote numbers on the whiteboard. There was something different about him here, away from the imposing office where they'd first met. His shoulders seemed less squared, his movements more natural. "If we restructure these departments," Richard explained, pointing to the diagram he'd drawn, "we can cut costs without losing any employees." He turned to face her, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Was that concern? "I know how important it is to you to protect your workers." Sarah frowned. This was what confused her most. The Richard Gray she'd heard about, the ruthless corporate raider who'd helped destroy her father's company, should have suggested massive layoffs as the first solution. Instead, he spent hours finding ways to save jobs. "Miss Maxwell?" Richard's voice broke through her thoughts. "Do you have any questions about the restructuring plan?" "Why do you care?" The words burst out before she could stop them, weeks of confusion and frustration finally boiling over. "Why do you care about saving jobs? About helping my company? About any of this?" She stood up, her hands pressed flat against the table. "You helped destroy everything my father built. You took away his legacy, his dignity, and now you're acting like some kind of corporate saint?" Richard went still, his marker suspended in midair. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Then, slowly, he put the marker down and walked to the windows, his back to her. "I never wanted to hurt your father," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or you." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Really? Because that's exactly what you did. You and your father systematically destroyed everything we had." Richard turned to face her, and the raw pain in his expression made her step back. "My father," he said, the words coming out like they physically hurt him. "My father is the one who orchestrated everything. I was just his puppet, his tool to get what he wanted." Sarah stared at him, her anger momentarily forgotten. "What are you talking about?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human and vulnerable that it didn't fit with any version of him she knew. "I was 28 when it happened, fresh out of business school, eager to prove myself to my father. He told me Maxwell Industries was corrupt, that your father was embezzling money, that taking down the company was the right thing to do. His voice grew hoarse. I believed him. I wanted so badly to believe him. He moved to the conference table, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles turned white. By the time I discovered the truth, that my father had fabricated everything, that he'd wanted Maxwell Industries destroyed simply because your father refused to sell to him, it was too late. The damage was done. Sarah felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She sank back into her chair, her mind spinning. Why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you tell someone? A bitter smile crossed Richard's face. My father made it clear what would happen if I did. He had evidence, fabricated, but convincing, that would have implicated me in financial fraud. I would have gone to prison, and he would have walked away clean. He finally met her eyes. I was a coward. I chose self-preservation over doing what was right, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at Richard, really seeing him for the first time. The weight of responsibility in his shoulders, the haunted look in his eyes. How had she missed it before? That's why you're helping me now, she said slowly. You're trying to make amends. Richard nodded, sinking into a chair. I know it doesn't make up for what happened. Nothing can. But when I heard about your company's troubles, I saw a chance to finally do something right. He looked down at his hands. I understand if this changes nothing for you. Your anger is justified, and I don't expect forgiveness. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back. Her world had just shifted on its axis, and she needed time to process what this meant. The enemy she'd hated for so long was actually another victim of Richard Gray Sr.'s machinations. I need some hair, she said abruptly, standing up. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, unable to look at Richard. I need time to think about all this. Of course, Richard said quietly. Take all the time you need. Sarah walked to the door, her mind churning with questions and revelations. At the threshold, she paused and turned back. Richard sat where she'd left him, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Thank you, she said softly, for telling me the truth. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Thank you for listening. Sarah nodded once and left the room, her heels clicking against the floor as she headed for the elevator. Her hands were still shaking as she pressed the button for the lobby. Everything she'd believed about Richard Gray had just been turned upside down, and she didn't know what to think anymore. One thing was certain. She could no longer see him as just the man who'd helped destroy her family. He was something more complicated, a man who'd made terrible mistakes, who'd been manipulated by his own father, who carried guilt as heavy as her grief. And somehow, that made everything both clearer and more confusing than ever before. Sarah spent the next few days in a fog of confusion. Her office, once a sanctuary of clear purpose and direction, now felt like a maze of conflicting emotions. The manila folders spread across her desk contained financial records that should have held her complete attention, but her mind kept drifting back to Richard's confession. She rubbed her temples, trying to focus on the numbers before her. The afternoon sun streamed through her window, casting long shadows across the carpet. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten in the midst of her work. This can't be right, she muttered, pulling another stack of papers closer. The more she dug into the company's records, the more irregularities she found. Numbers that didn't add up, transactions that made no sense, partnerships that seemed to exist only on paper. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Meeting at 3 o'clock? Sarah's stomach tightened. Even simple communications with him felt different now. She typed back a quick yes and returned to her work, determined to have something concrete to show him. By the time 3 o'clock rolled around, she had filled an entire whiteboard with connections and questions. When Richard walked in, his tie slightly loosened and dark circles under his eyes, she barely gave him time to close the door. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the board. "These shell companies here and here, they're all connected to your father's corporation, but through so many layers of paperwork that it's almost impossible to trace." Richard stepped closer to the board, his expression darkening. He's always been careful about covering his tracks. But that's just it, Sarah continued, grabbing a stack of papers from her desk. "He wasn't careful enough. I found a pattern." She spread the documents across her conference table. Every 3 months, large sums of money move through these companies, always on the same day, always following the same path. Richard leaned over the papers, his shoulder nearly touching hers. Sarah felt herself tense at his proximity, her body's automatic response at odds with her growing understanding of him as a person. "This goes beyond what happened to your father's company," Richard said quietly. "These transactions, they're recent, within the last year." Sarah nodded, pushing back her hair in frustration. "Whatever your father is involved in, it's bigger than just destroying Maxwell Industries. These numbers suggest he's been systematically targeting other companies too." "A corporate takeover strategy," Richard muttered, "but on a scale I've never seen before." Sarah watched him carefully. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Richard," she said softly, "how deep does this go?" He turned to face her, and for a moment she saw that same vulnerability from his confession days ago. "I don't know. I've spent years trying to distance myself from his methods, his way of doing business. But this," he gestured at the documents, "this suggests a level of corruption I never imagined." Sarah felt her anger flare again, but it was different now, directed not at Richard, but at the system that had allowed this to happen. "We need to expose this," she said firmly. "It won't be easy." Richard warned, "My father has connections everywhere. Politicians, judges, other CEOs. He's built his empire on favors and threats." "I don't care," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "He destroyed my father's legacy. He manipulated you. How many other lives has he ruined?" Richard studied her for a long moment. "Working together on this. It could be dangerous. Are you sure?" Sarah met his gaze. The distrust was still there, lingering between them like a shadow, but something else was growing too. A shared purpose, a determination to right the wrongs they'd both suffered. "I'm sure," she said. "We need to stop him." They spent the next several hours going through the documents, creating a timeline of suspicious activities. Sarah found herself working surprisingly well with Richard. His knowledge of his father's business practices complemented her eye for financial details. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the office, Sarah sat back in her chair, exhausted. "We need more proof," she said. "Something concrete that shows the illegal nature of these transactions." Richard nodded, loosening his tie further. "I might be able to help with that. I still have access to some of the private servers at my father's company. If we're careful, we might find something there." "That's risky," Sarah pointed out. "If he catches you—" "He won't," Richard said grimly. "I learned from the best how to cover my tracks." Sarah studied him, noting the determination in his eyes. It was strange, she realized, how quickly things had changed. A week ago she would have celebrated any sign of trouble in Richard's life. Now she found herself worried about the risks he was taking. "We'll need to be careful," she said finally. "Your father's not the only one involved in this. These other companies, these executives, they all have something to lose if we expose this." Richard stood up, gathering his jacket from the back of his chair. "I'll start looking through the servers tonight. The sooner we find proof, the better." As he headed for the door, Sarah called out, "Richard?" He turned back, his hand on the doorknob. "Thank you for helping with this." A small smile crossed his face, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I should have done something years ago, maybe if I had. We can't change the past," Sarah said quietly, "but we can make sure justice is served now." After he left, Sarah turned back to her whiteboard, staring at the web of connections they'd uncovered. Her father's company was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and somehow she and Richard had become unlikely allies in solving it. The weight of what they were undertaking settled heavily on her shoulders. They were going up against not just Richard's father, but an entire network of corrupt business leaders. The task seemed almost impossible, yet Sarah felt more determined than ever. She gathered her things, her mind already planning their next steps. As she locked up her office, she couldn't help but wonder how much more they would uncover, and what price they might have to pay for the truth. The elevator ride down was silent, but Sarah's thoughts were racing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps new dangers. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was truly fighting for something bigger than herself. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard's office as Sarah pored over another stack of financial documents. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the evening, and they had been at this for hours. Empty coffee cups littered the massive oak desk between them, testament to their dedication. "Look at this," Sarah said, pushing a document across to Richard. "These transactions, they're all routed through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But the dates—" She tapped her finger on the paper meaningfully. Richard leaned forward, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. "They match exactly with when your father's company started having problems." "It's not just coincidence anymore," Sarah said, running her hands through her hair in frustration. "We're looking at a deliberate pattern of destruction." Richard fell silent, his shoulders tense. Sarah noticed the way his jaw clenched, a tell she'd come to recognize over their weeks of working together. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. "My father," he began, then stopped. Sarah waited, watching as he struggled with whatever he was about to say. "My father started grooming me for this when I was just a kid." Sarah set down her pen, giving him her full attention. There was something in his voice she'd never heard before, a rawness that made her chest tighten. "Every summer, instead of going to camp or playing with friends, I was in board meetings. By 12, I could read financial statements better than most adults. By 15, I was analyzing merger strategies." He let out a bitter laugh. "Do you know what he got me for my 16th birthday? A detailed breakdown of how to dismantle a competing company." "That's terrible," Sarah said softly, seeing for the first time the wounded child behind the powerful executive. "He would wake me up at 5 in the morning to quiz me about market trends. If I got an answer wrong—" Richard's voice trailed off. He turned to face her, his eyes haunted. "When your father's company came into his crosshairs, I was 28. I'd just made CEO of our European division. I thought I was finally proving myself." Sarah stood up, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "What happened?" "He called me into his office one day, laid out this elaborate plan to destroy Maxwell Industries, said it was my chance to prove I was worthy of the grey name." Richard's hands clenched into fists. When I hesitated, he reminded me of all the times I'd failed him, all the ways I wasn't good enough. He said if I couldn't do this one thing, I might as well walk away from everything. "So you did it," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I did it. I orchestrated every move, every backstab, every betrayal, and every night I'd go home and feel sick about it." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "Your father was a good man, Sarah. He didn't deserve what we did to him." The silence that followed was heavy with shared pain. Sarah found herself reaching out, touching Richard's arm gently. He flinched slightly at the contact, but didn't pull away. "We can't change what happened," she said quietly. "But we can make it right now." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed on the desk. She walked over to check it, expecting another late-night email. Instead, she found a series of increasingly panicked messages from her assistant, Maria. "Something's wrong," she said, quickly dialing Maria's number. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. "What is it?" Richard asked, moving to her side. "Maria was supposed to meet me 2 hours ago with some documents from the old archive room. She never showed up." Sarah's heart began to race. "She's not answering her phone, and these messages, the last one just says, 'They know.'" Richard's face darkened. When was the last message sent? 45 minutes ago. Sarah was already gathering her things. "I need to go to her apartment, make sure she's okay." "I'm coming with you," Richard said firmly, grabbing his jacket. "If someone's trying to silence her—" They took the elevator down to the parking garage in tense silence. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Maria had been helping them dig through old records, looking for evidence of the conspiracy. If someone had found out— Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. "Take my car. It's faster, and we don't know who might be watching." The drive to Maria's apartment was quick, but felt endless. When they arrived, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, the apartment had been ransacked. Papers were strewn everywhere, furniture overturned, and Maria was nowhere to be found. "Her laptop's gone," Sarah said, surveying the chaos. "And look, her backup drive is missing too." Richard picked up a coffee mug from the floor, still half full and warm. "This happened recently, within the last hour, I'd guess." Sarah's phone rang, making them both jump. Unknown number. With trembling fingers, she answered and put it on speaker. "Miss Maxwell," a distorted voice said. "Consider this a friendly warning. Some doors are better left closed. Drop your investigation, or your assistant won't be the only one to disappear." The line went dead. Sarah and Richard looked at each other, the reality of their situation hitting home. This wasn't just about uncovering financial fraud anymore. They were dealing with people willing to kidnap and threaten to protect their secrets. "We need to call the police," Sarah said, already dialing. "Wait." Richard caught her wrist gently. "We don't know who we can trust. My father has connections throughout the department." "So what do? We can't just leave Maria." "We won't," Richard said firmly. "But we need to be smart about this. These people, my father's people, they play by different rules. We need to think like them to beat them." Sarah lowered her phone, knowing he was right. Looking around the destroyed apartment, she felt the weight of their investigation take on new meaning. They weren't just trying to expose corruption anymore. They were fighting for their lives and the lives of others. "The conspiracy goes deeper than we thought," she said quietly. Richard nodded grimly. "Much deeper. And now we know they're watching us." They stood in the chaos of Maria's apartment, both understanding that their partnership had just become more than a professional arrangement. They were in this together now, bound by the danger they faced and the truth they sought to uncover. Sarah's hands shook as she placed her phone on Maria's coffee table, amidst the scattered papers and broken photo frames. The weight of what they'd discovered pressed down on her chest like a physical burden. She looked at Richard, who stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. "We need to tell the others at the office," she said, her voice barely steady. "They need to know they might be in danger." Richard turned, his face etched with concern. I'll have security increased immediately, but we need to be careful about how we handle this. If we cause panic, we might tip our hand to whoever's behind this." They left Maria's apartment, making sure to lock the door despite the obvious break-in. The drive back to the office was tense, filled with worried glances and half-formed plans. Sarah couldn't shake the image of Maria's ransacked apartment from her mind. The next morning, the office was buzzing with whispered conversations and worried looks. Maria's empty desk stood as a stark reminder of what they were up against. Sarah called an emergency meeting with her senior staff, her heart heavy as she explained the situation without revealing too much. "Due to some recent developments," she began, choosing her words carefully, "we're implementing additional security measures. Please report any suspicious activity immediately." After the meeting, Sarah retreated to her office, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were facing. Richard joined her, closing the door behind him. "I've been going through some old files," he said, placing a thick folder on her desk. "Look at this." Sarah leaned forward, examining the documents. They showed a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts, all leading back to a handful of powerful corporations. But what caught her eye wasn't the money trail, it was the names attached to it. "These people?" she whispered, recognizing several prominent figures in politics and business. "Your father's company is just one piece of the puzzle." Richard nodded grimly. "He's not the mastermind we thought he was. He's just another player in their game." Sarah stood up, pacing the room. "All this time we thought it was just about our families, about what happened to my father's company. But this is so much bigger." "My father," Richard said, his voice tight with emotion. "He always made it seem like he was in control, that everything that happened was his plan. But looking at these documents—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Sarah watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. Despite everything that had happened between their families, she could see how much this revelation was affecting him. As the day wore on, they dove deeper into the documents, uncovering more connections, more players in this dangerous game. The sun had long since set when Sarah finally looked up from her computer, her eyes burning from strain. Richard was still there, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up as he worked. In the soft glow of the desk lamp, Sarah found herself studying his profile, the determined set of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated. "You could have walked away from all this," she said softly. "You didn't have to help me uncover the truth." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Yes, I did. I've spent too many years being my father's puppet, doing his dirty work. I need to make this right." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Sarah. For the first time, she truly saw beyond the mask he usually wore, beyond the powerful CEO, beyond the man who had helped destroy her father's company. She saw someone fighting for redemption, someone willing to risk everything to expose the truth. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. "That would be great," he replied, offering a tired smile. In the small office kitchenette, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she prepared 2 cups of coffee. The events of the past 24 hours swirled in her mind: Maria's disappearance, the threatening phone call, the discovery of the larger conspiracy. But mixed with all that was a new awareness of Richard, an undeniable pull she couldn't ignore. When she returned to her office, Richard had moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. She handed him his coffee, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent a small shiver through her. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and warm. They stood together at the window, the city spread out before them like a sea of stars. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with something new and unexpected. "We're in dangerous territory," Richard said finally, turning to face her. "These people, they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to keep their secrets." Sarah met his gaze. "I know, but we can't back down now. We owe it to Maria, to my father, to everyone they've hurt." Richard nodded, stepping closer. "Sarah, He paused, searching for words. "I need you to know that whatever happens, I'm in this with you. All the way." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Standing there in the quiet office, with the weight of their discoveries hanging over them and the danger pressing in from all sides, Sarah felt something shift between them. The attraction she'd been trying to ignore suddenly felt overwhelming. Before either of them could speak again, Sarah's computer chimed with a new email. The moment broke, but something had changed. As they returned to their work, Sarah knew that their partnership had evolved into something more complex, more personal. The night stretched on as they continued their investigation, but now there was a new undercurrent of awareness between them. Every shared glance, every accidental touch carried extra weight. Despite the danger they faced, despite their complicated history, Sarah couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward Richard, a man who was proving to be so different from what she'd originally believed. The city lights twinkled outside the office windows as Sarah and Richard pored over another stack of documents. It was well past midnight, but neither seemed to notice the late hour. Papers and empty coffee cups littered the conference room table, evidence of their tireless investigation. "Look at this," Sarah said, sliding a document across to Richard. "These transactions, they're all routed through shell companies, but the patterns are clear. Your father wasn't working alone." Richard leaned forward, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, but his focus remained sharp. "These dates match perfectly with when the pressure on your father's company began." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, guilt etching deep lines in his face. "I was such a fool. They used me like a puppet, and I never questioned it." Sarah watched him, noting the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of this revelation. Gone was the powerful, intimidating CEO she'd first met. In his place sat a man grappling with the devastating truth of his own manipulation. "My father always said business was about control." Richard continued, his voice heavy with regret. "Everything had to be calculated, precise. Emotions were a weakness." He looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with pain. "I followed his playbook without question, destroying your family's company piece by piece. I thought I was proving myself to him, but I was just another pawn in their game." Sarah felt her heart twist. The anger she'd carried for so long began to shift, making room for understanding. "You were raised in that environment, Richard. You didn't know any different." "That's no excuse," he said firmly. "I made those choices. I signed those papers. I watched your father's company crumble and told myself it was just business." He stood up abruptly, walking to the window. "I have to make this right." Sarah joined him at the window, their reflections pale against the darkness beyond. "We're already doing that. Every piece of evidence we uncover brings us closer to exposing the truth." Richard turned to face her, their proximity suddenly apparent in the quiet room. "Do you know what scares me the most?" he asked softly. "It's not the danger we're in, or even what my father might do when this all comes out. It's the thought that I might never be able to make up for what I did to your family." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within Sarah. She found herself reaching out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You're not that person anymore, Richard. I've seen how hard you're working to uncover the truth, even though it means exposing your own father." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. The tension between them shifted, charged with something new and unexpected. "Sarah, The moment was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing on the table. They both jumped, the spell broken. It was an email from one of their investigators. "They've found something," Sarah said, scanning the message. "Financial records from offshore accounts. This could be the breakthrough we need." They spent the next few hours analyzing the new information, but something had changed between them. Their shoulders brushed as they leaned over documents together. Their eyes met and held for longer than necessary. The anger that had once filled the space between them had transformed into something else entirely. As dawn began to break over the city, Sarah found herself watching Richard as he made notes, struck by how different he was from the man she'd first met. His dedication to exposing the truth, his willingness to face his own mistakes. It moved her in ways she hadn't expected. "I need to tell you something," Richard said suddenly, looking up from his work. "When this story breaks, it's going to be explosive. My father, he won't go down quietly. There will be consequences for everyone involved, including me." Sarah felt a surge of protectiveness. "We'll face it together. We've come too far to back down now." "That's just it," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I don't want you caught in the crossfire. These people, my father included, they're dangerous. They've already shown what they're capable of with Maria's disappearance." "I'm not afraid," Sarah replied, meeting his concerned gaze. "Are you?" Richard stood up, moving closer to her. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Not for myself, but for you. When I think about something happening to you because of all this." The raw honesty in his voice made Sarah's heart race. She looked up at him, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. The morning light streaming through the windows cast a soft glow around them, making the moment feel somehow separate from the chaos of their investigation. "Richard," she said softly, "I used to think I knew exactly who you were. I had you figured out. The ruthless businessman, just like your father. But I was wrong." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "The man I've come to know these past weeks, the one who's fighting so hard to expose the truth, that's who you really are." The vulnerability in Richard's eyes took her breath away. He reached out, gently touching her cheek. "Sarah, A sharp knock at the door made them both start. They stepped apart as Richard's assistant entered with more files. But the moment lingered between them, full of unspoken words and growing feelings. As they returned to their work, Sarah found herself struggling to focus. Her hatred for Richard had been such a fundamental part of her life for so long. Now, watching him work tirelessly to uncover the truth, seeing his genuine remorse and determination to make things right, she couldn't deny that her feelings had changed dramatically. The man she'd once despised had become someone she trusted, someone she cared for deeply. The morning wore on as they continued their investigation, but everything felt different now. Every shared glance carried new meaning. Every accidental touch sent electricity through her skin. The past that had divided them was still there, but it was being steadily overshadowed by the present, by who they were becoming together in their pursuit of justice. Sarah stared at the computer screen, her hands trembling as she read through the documents for the third time. The evidence was undeniable, but her mind refused to accept it. Beside her, Richard stood silent, his face etched with concern. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet office. "Uncle James, he practically helped raise me after Dad died." The financial records painted a clear picture. James Maxwell, her father's trusted brother and longtime business partner, had been working with Richard's father from the beginning. His signature appeared on dozens of suspicious transactions, all carefully hidden behind shell companies and offshore accounts. "Sarah," Richard said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry." She shrugged off his touch, standing abruptly. The morning sun streaming through the windows felt too bright, too harsh. "All this time," she said, pacing the room, "I blamed you and your father for everything. But my own uncle—" Her voice cracked. Richard watched her, his own guilt evident in his expression. "I should have dug deeper years ago, if I hadn't been so willing to follow my father's orders." "Stop," Sarah interrupted, turning to face him. "We both know your father would have found another way." "But Uncle James—" She pressed her hands against her temples. "He was there at Dad's funeral. He held my hand as they lowered the casket. How could he look me in the eye knowing what he'd done?" The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air. Sarah thought back to all the family dinners, the holidays, the way Uncle James had stepped in to help her navigate the business world after her father's death. Every memory now felt tainted, poisoned by this revelation. "The timing of the transactions," Richard said, moving to the computer. "Look here. They started small, just before your father's company began having troubles. Then they increased dramatically right around the time Dad died." Sarah finished, her voice hollow. The implications made her stomach turn. Before either of them could speak further, Richard's phone buzzed. His face darkened as he read the message. "It's my father. He wants to meet." Sarah's head snapped up. "What?" "He says he knows what we've been investigating. He's threatening to release information that would destroy both our reputations if we don't stop immediately." "What kind of information?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of his distress. "It doesn't matter if it's real or not. He has enough connections to make anything seem true. And with your uncle involved—" He met her eyes. "Sarah, they could fabricate evidence to make it look like you were involved in your father's company's downfall." The thought sent a chill down her spine. "They wouldn't dare." "My father would. And now we know your uncle would too." Sarah sank into her chair, the full weight of their situation crushing down on her. Everything she'd believed about her family's destruction had been wrong. The enemy hadn't just been external. It had been sleeping under her own roof, sharing her family meals, offering false comfort. "We have to expose them," she said finally, her voice stronger. "All of them." Richard nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "My father's message. He's given us 24 hours to abandon the investigation. After that, he says he'll release everything he has." Sarah stood again, determination replacing her earlier shock. "Then we have 24 hours to gather enough evidence to take them all down first." "It's dangerous," Richard warned. "These men, my father, your uncle, they've built their lives on destroying others. They won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to protect themselves." "I don't care," Sarah said fiercely. "They took everything from me. My father, my family's legacy, my trust. I won't let them take my dignity too." Richard moved closer to her, his presence both comforting and protective. "We'll need help. I have some contacts in the Financial Crimes Division who've been waiting for a chance to investigate my father. With this new evidence about your uncle—" "Do it," Sarah said. "Make the calls. But Richard—" She caught his arm. "Your father will come after you too. Everything you've built—" "Let him try," Richard replied, his jaw set. "I've spent too many years being his puppet. It's time I stood up to him, whatever the cost." They worked through the morning, gathering documents and making secure copies of everything they'd discovered. Sarah couldn't stop her hands from shaking every time she came across her uncle's signature, but she channeled her pain into determination. Around noon, another message arrived from Richard's father. This one contained photos, recent ones of Sarah and Richard working late, entering and leaving the office together, sharing meals. The implicit threat was clear. They were being watched. "He's trying to scare us," Richard said, his voice tight with anger. "This is what he does. Makes you feel like he's always one step ahead." Sarah stared at the photos, something occurring to her. "Richard, these photos, they're not just surveillance. They're telling us something else." He looked at her questioningly. "Your father knows we've been working together, getting closer. He's not just threatening our professional lives. He's threatening whatever is growing between us, too." The words hung in the air between them, the first acknowledgement of their changing relationship. Richard's expression softened as he looked at her. "Sarah, But before he could finish, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unlisted number. Richard answered on speaker. "Hello, son." His father's voice filled the room, cold and controlled. "I see you received my messages. I hope you're making the wise choice." "It's over, Father," Richard replied firmly. "We know everything about the conspiracy, about James Maxwell's involvement, all of it." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Do you really think you can stand against me? Against all of us? You're still that same weak boy, Richard, always trying to prove himself." Sarah watched as Richard's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. "Not anymore. We're exposing everything, all the corruption, all the lies. It ends now. Think carefully about what you're doing." His father warned. "Sarah's uncle isn't the only one with secrets. How do you think she'll feel when she learns the full extent of your involvement in her father's downfall?" Sarah stepped forward. "I already know what Richard did," she said clearly. "I also know what you did to him, how you manipulated him. It doesn't change anything." Another pause, longer this time. When Richard's father spoke again, his voice had lost its amused edge. "You have 24 hours. After that, I destroy everything. Your reputations, your careers, your futures. Choose wisely." The line went dead. Sarah and Richard looked at each other, the weight of the threat hanging between them. But instead of fear, Sarah felt stronger. Standing beside Richard, facing this together, she knew they could weather whatever storm was coming. "We should call your contacts," she said. "Get everything ready. We only have 24 hours to end this." Richard nodded, but before he reached for his phone, he took her hand. "Sarah, what my father said about my involvement—" She squeezed his hand. "The past is the past. What matters is what we do now." He looked at their joined hands, then back to her face. "Whatever happens, whatever they try to do to us, I want you to know that working with you, getting to know the real you, it's changed everything." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. They had work to do. The truth needed to come out, no matter the cost. And for the first time since this all began, she truly believed they could win. Richard's father's threat echoed in the quiet office as Sarah and Richard sat surrounded by stacks of documents and digital files. The evening sun cast long shadows across the room, a stark reminder that time was running out. 24 hours, that's all they had left before everything would come crashing down. Sarah stood up from her desk, her movements decisive. "We need to go public with everything. All of it." Richard looked up from his computer, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. "Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. My father will use every resource he has to destroy us." "I'm sure," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "We can't let them win. Not after everything we've uncovered." They spent the next several hours organizing their evidence into a compelling narrative. Financial records showing the manipulation of stocks, emails proving collusion between Richard's father and Sarah's uncle, witness statements from employees who had been threatened into silence. The truth was there, buried in numbers and words, waiting to be exposed. We should release it through multiple channels, Richard suggested, running a hand through his disheveled hair. My father has influence with many media outlets, but he can't control them all. Sarah nodded, already typing furiously on her laptop. I'm preparing press packages for every major news organization in the city. We'll also need to post everything online, somewhere secure where they can't take it down. As they worked, their shoulders occasionally brushing, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how different things felt now. The man she had once blamed for her family's destruction was now her strongest ally. More than that, he had become someone she trusted, someone she... The sharp ring of Richard's phone cut through her thoughts. His face darkened as he read the message. What is it? She asked. My father's making his move. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's going to try to force me out before we can expose everything. Sarah's heart raced. Then we need to move faster. We can't wait until morning. They worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. As dawn approached, they had everything ready. Press releases, documentary evidence, witness statements, all carefully organized and verified. There's something else we need to discuss, Richard said softly as they watched the sun rise over the city skyline. This isn't just about exposing the conspiracy anymore. When this goes public, it's going to affect both our families in ways we can't predict. Sarah turned to face him, seeing the worry in his eyes. I know. My uncle. Finding out he was involved in my father's downfall. She took a deep breath. But we have to do this, for justice, for the truth. Richard stepped closer, his presence both comforting and electric. Sarah, these past weeks, working with you, I need you to know that... Don't. She interrupted gently. Not yet. Let's finish this first. He nodded, understanding. They had both learned the hard way that personal feelings had to wait when there was so much at stake. At 7 o'clock sharp, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. Richard's father had already begun his counterattack, releasing a statement about concerning irregularities in Sarah's company's finances. He's trying to discredit us before we can expose him, Richard said, his jaw clenching. Sarah stood up straighter, a fierce determination in her eyes. Then let's not give him the chance. With trembling fingers but unwavering resolve, she pressed the send button on her laptop. In an instant, their carefully gathered evidence began flowing out to news outlets across the city. Richard simultaneously activated their online platform, making all the documentation publicly available. Within minutes, their phones began ringing non-stop. Reporters, board members, lawyers, everyone wanted answers. But Sarah had one more step to take. I need to make a public statement, she announced. Not through press releases or documents. People need to see a face, hear the truth directly. Richard's eyes widened. Sarah, that's incredibly risky. My father will... I know what he'll do. She cut in. But I have to do this. For my father. For everyone they've hurt. She could see the conflict in Richard's eyes, his instinct to protect her, warring with his respect for her decision. Finally, he nodded. Then I'll be right there with you. Within an hour, they had arranged an impromptu press conference outside their office building. As cameras rolled and reporters gathered, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. Richard stood slightly behind her, a steady presence at her back. My name is Sarah Maxwell, she began, her voice clear and strong. And I'm here to tell you the truth about what happened to Maxwell Industries, about the corruption that has poisoned our business community, and about the people responsible, including my own uncle. As she spoke, laying out the evidence they had gathered, she could feel the shock rippling through the crowd. Reporters frantically took notes, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the city, She knew Richard's father was watching, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. When she finished speaking, the questions came fast and furious. But before she could answer, a commotion at the back of the crowd drew everyone's attention. Richard's father had arrived, flanked by lawyers and security personnel. His face was a mask of cold fury as he pushed through the reporters. "This is nothing but slander and lies," he announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Ms. Maxwell is attempting to deflect from her own company's failures." But Sarah stood her ground, even as he approached the makeshift podium. Richard stepped forward, placing himself between them. "Every word she's said is true," Richard declared, his voice steady. "And I have first-hand knowledge of it all. I was there. I was part of it. And I'm done being silent." The crowd erupted with questions, cameras flashing frantically. Richard's father's face contorted with rage, but before he could speak, Sarah made her final move. "We've just released additional documentation," she announced, "including recorded conversations and email exchanges that prove everything we've said. It's all available online now, and copies have been sent to the authorities." She could see the moment Richard's father realized he had lost control. His mask slipped, just for a second, revealing the fury beneath. But it was too late. The truth was out, spreading across the city like wildfire, impossible to contain. As the media frenzy escalated around them, Sarah felt Richard's hand find hers, squeezing gently. They had done it. Whatever came next, whatever price they had to pay, the truth was finally free. The chaos of the press conference swirled around them, but in that moment, standing together, they were anchored. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be legal battles, family confrontations, and countless challenges to face. But they would face them together, their bond forged in the fire of truth and redemption. The morning after the press conference, Sarah woke up to over 100 missed calls and countless notifications lighting up her phone. The story had exploded overnight, dominating every major news outlet in the city. Headlines screamed about corporate corruption, family betrayal, and the shocking revelations that had rocked the business community. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the messages. Her sister had called 12 times. Her mother's text simply read, "How could Uncle James do this to us?" The weight of what she'd done, exposing not just Richard's father but her own uncle, felt heavy on her shoulders. The office was in chaos when she arrived. Employees huddled in small groups, whispering and casting uncertain glances her way. The stock price had plummeted, and several board members had already resigned. Sarah walked through it all with her head held high, though her heart was racing. Richard met her in her office, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His usually pristine suit was slightly rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "My father's lawyers delivered this an hour ago," he said quietly, placing a thick envelope on her desk. "He's officially cutting all ties with me, personally and professionally. I've been removed from the board and stripped of my position." Sarah's throat tightened. "Richard, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he interrupted, his voice firm despite the pain in his eyes. "I made my choice. It was the right one." Before they could discuss it further, Sarah's assistant burst in. "Ms. Maxwell, your Uncle James is here. He's demanding to see you." Sarah's uncle stood in the lobby, his face twisted with rage. The man who had once given her piggyback rides at family barbecues now looked like a stranger. "How dare you!" he spat as she approached. "After everything I've done for this family, everything you've done!" Sarah's voice shook with anger. "You helped destroy Dad's company. You betrayed your own brother." "I was protecting us," James shouted. "Your father was too idealistic, too caught up in his principles. He would have run this company into the ground. I did what I had to do to secure our future." "You're just like Richard's father," Sarah said quietly. "So focused on power that you forgot what really matters." Security escorted James out as he continued shouting threats about lawsuits and retribution. Sarah watched him go, feeling a piece of her childhood crumble away. Throughout the day, the hits kept coming. Major clients began pulling their contracts. Partners distanced themselves. Sarah's mother called, sobbing about how their family name was being dragged through the mud in the press. By evening, both Sarah and Richard were emotionally exhausted. They sat in her office, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The news was still playing on the muted TV, showing clips from their press conference interspersed with shots of Richard's father's angry denials and their company's plummeting stock prices. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked softly. Richard turned to her, his eyes tired but determined. "We rebuild, from the ground up if we have to, but we do it right this time." Sarah reached across the desk and took his hand. The touch was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through together. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're here. I couldn't face this alone." "You don't have to," he assured her, squeezing her hand. "We're in this together now." The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, press statements, and damage control. Richard's father launched an aggressive counterattack, using his considerable influence to try to discredit them. But the evidence they'd released was too solid, too comprehensive to deny. Sarah's uncle disappeared, reportedly leaving the country ahead of the investigating authorities. The betrayal hit Sarah's family hard. Her mother stopped taking calls, retreating to their family's lake house to avoid the media circus. Her sister was torn between supporting Sarah and dealing with her own sense of betrayal. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Employees who had initially been scared started coming forward with their own stories of corruption they'd witnessed. Other companies, inspired by their stand, began internal investigations. Slowly, a movement for corporate transparency began to build. Richard threw himself into the work of rebuilding, showing up early each morning despite having lost everything he'd known. His father's disownment had been public and brutal, but Richard stood firm. Sarah watched him work with a new appreciation, seeing the strength it took to choose what was right over what was easy. One evening, as they worked late reviewing restructuring plans, Richard opened up about his father's final words to him. "He said I was weak," Richard said, staring out the window, "that I'd betrayed everything he'd built. But for the first time in my life, I feel strong. Standing up to him, choosing my own path. It's terrifying, but it feels right." Sarah moved to stand beside him. "It was never weakness, Richard. Standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything, that's real strength." He turned to look at her, and in that moment, the last barriers between them seemed to fall away. They were no longer the bitter enemies they'd been when this all started. They were partners, survivors, and perhaps something more. The media dubbed them the whistleblowers of Wall Street, running stories about their unlikely alliance and the courage it took to expose the truth. But for Sarah and Richard, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about redemption, about making things right, and about the unexpected bond they'd formed in the process. Together, they began the slow work of rebuilding their companies. They implemented new transparency policies, restructured their boards, and reached out to smaller businesses that had been hurt by the corrupt practices they'd exposed. It wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges and setbacks, but they faced them together. "I never thought I'd say this," Sarah admitted one day, as they shared a quiet moment between meetings. "But maybe some good came from all this mess. We're building something better than what was destroyed." Richard smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes in a way it never had before. "We're building it together. That's what matters." The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were no longer walking it alone. From the ashes of betrayal and corruption, they were creating something new, something built on truth, trust, and the unshakable bond they'd forged through adversity. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Sarah's office as she reviewed the latest headlines. Corporate Titan falls, Richard Gray Sr. faces federal charges. Her eyes moved to another. Maxwell family member in custody, conspiracy unravels. The words still felt surreal, even after weeks of watching their carefully gathered evidence tear down the corrupt empire they'd exposed. Richard stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the morning light. The SEC just confirmed they're freezing all of my father's assets, he said quietly. Everything he built, everything he thought was untouchable, gone in a matter of weeks. Sarah set down her tablet and walked over to him. Are you okay? He turned to face her, his expression a mixture of relief and sadness. I should be celebrating, shouldn't I? The man who manipulated me my entire life, who forced me to destroy your family's company, he's finally facing justice. But all I feel is... He trailed off, searching for the words. Empty? Sarah supplied softly. I felt the same way when they arrested my uncle, Marcus. The arrest had been dramatic. Federal agents surrounding her uncle's mansion at dawn, leading him out in handcuffs while news helicopters circled overhead. The man who had helped raise her, who had bounced her on his knee as a child, had betrayed not just the family business, but the very essence of what it meant to be a Maxwell. The hardest part, Sarah continued, is accepting that sometimes the people we love aren't who we thought they were. Richard nodded, running a hand through his dark hair. My father called me yesterday, from detention. He still believes he did nothing wrong. He said he was teaching me how to be strong, how to survive in this world, as if destroying people's lives was the only way to succeed. Sarah reached out and touched his arm, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months ago. But you proved him wrong. We both did. The evidence they'd gathered had been overwhelming. Financial records, secret recordings, witness testimonies. It all painted a picture of corruption so vast it had shocked even the most cynical investigators. Richard's father had orchestrated hostile takeovers and market manipulations for decades, while Sarah's uncle had served as his inside man, systematically weakening companies from within. The DA's office called this morning, Sarah said, moving back to her desk. They want us to testify at the preliminary hearings next month. Both cases, your father's and my uncle's, will be tried together. Richard's jaw tightened. We knew this was coming. Are you ready for it? Sarah let out a long breath. Ready to testify against my own uncle? To look him in the eye and tell the world how he betrayed everything our family stood for? She shook her head. No, but I'll do it anyway. The office fell quiet, save for the distant sounds of the city below. Their world had changed so dramatically in such a short time. The companies they were now trying to rebuild bore little resemblance to the corrupt entities they'd inherited. Transparency policies had been implemented, ethical oversight committees established, and a new generation of leadership brought in. Did you see the latest profit projections? Richard asked, changing the subject. He moved to sit in one of the chairs facing Sarah's desk. Down 30% from last quarter, Sarah replied. But that's to be expected. We're essentially starting over. Clean slate. Richard agreed, though I never thought I'd be grateful for one. Sarah found herself studying his face, the strong jaw, the kind eyes that had once seemed so cold to her. How different he looked now, freed from his father's influence. How different she felt, looking at him. I've been thinking, she said carefully, about everything that's happened, about how I hated you when we first met. I was so sure you were just like your father. Richard's expression softened. You had every right to hate me. I did terrible things." "Under your father's influence," Sarah corrected. "And you helped make it right. More than that, you risked everything to expose the truth." Their eyes met across the desk, and Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The attraction she'd been fighting for weeks surfaced again, stronger than ever. It was complicated, messy even, to feel this way about someone who had once been her enemy. But Richard wasn't that person anymore. Perhaps he never truly had been. "We should get ready for the board meeting," Richard said, breaking the moment. But he didn't move to leave. "The board can wait 5 minutes," Sarah replied. She stood and walked around her desk, perching on its edge near where Richard sat. "I need to say this. When you first offered to help save my company, I thought you had an ulterior motive. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to reveal some master plan to destroy what was left of my family's legacy." Richard started to speak, but Sarah held up her hand. "Let me finish. Instead, you showed me what real strength looks like. Not the kind your father believed in, not destroying others to get ahead, but standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." Richard stood slowly, bringing them face to face. "Sarah, I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "And I know how crazy that sounds, given our history. But somewhere between hating you and fighting alongside you, something changed." The silence that followed her words seemed to stretch forever. Then Richard reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "I've been falling in love with you too," he whispered. "Every day we worked together, every time you showed me there was another way to live, to lead. I fell a little more." When their lips met, it felt like the culmination of everything they'd been through together. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, carrying all the emotion and tension of their shared journey. They parted slowly, both a little breathless. Sarah smiled, resting her forehead against his. "So what now?" "Now," Richard said, "we keep rebuilding. Together. We show everyone that there's a better way to do business, to live, to love. We prove that my father was wrong, that true strength comes from doing what's right, not what's easy." Sarah nodded, her heart full. They had lost so much, family ties, trust, the security of their old lives. But in its place, they had found something more valuable: integrity, purpose, and a love born from the ashes of their shared pain. The board meeting could wait a few more minutes. Right now, in this moment, they had everything they needed. As winter melted into spring, Sarah Maxwell found herself adjusting to a new normal. The morning sun streamed through her office windows, casting a warm glow across the reorganized space. Gone were the heavy, dark furnishings of the old regime. In their place stood modern, transparent glass and light wood, a physical manifestation of the changes they'd implemented throughout both companies. She watched from her window as Richard's car pulled into the parking lot below. Even from this distance, she could see the spring in his step, so different from the rigid posture he'd carried when they first met. Their relationship had blossomed slowly, carefully, like a flower pushing through concrete. Unexpected, but beautiful nonetheless. "Good morning," Richard said, entering her office with 2 coffee cups. He placed one on her desk, the familiar scent of vanilla latte filling the air. "Ready for the quarterly review?" Sarah smiled, accepting the coffee. "Always. The numbers are looking better than expected." 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed it possible," Richard admitted, settling into what had become his usual chair. "The market analysts predicted we'd fail within 3 months." "And here we are," Sarah said, pride evident in her voice. "Both companies showing steady growth, ethical business practices in place, and a workforce that actually believes in what they're doing." The transformation hadn't been easy. After exposing the corruption, they'd lost several major clients and investors. Many had been part of the old guard, uncomfortable with the new transparency policies. But gradually, new partnerships had formed. Companies that valued integrity over quick profits began seeking them out. The Chamber of Commerce called this morning, Richard said, his eyes bright with excitement. They want us to speak at next month's Business Leadership Conference, something about innovative corporate restructuring and ethical business practices. Sarah laughed. Is that what they're calling our complete demolition and rebuilding of two major corporations? Well, it sounds better than how to survive when your father's a criminal mastermind and your business partner used to hate you, Richard replied with a wry smile. Their ability to joke about their past still amazed Sarah. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, it probably never would, but it had transformed into something manageable, even motivational. Throughout the day, they moved through their responsibilities with practiced ease. Their management styles complemented each other perfectly. Sarah's attention to detail balanced Richard's big-picture thinking. Where she was cautious, he was bold. Where he might hesitate, she pushed forward. During lunch, they sat in the small garden they'd created on the building's roof. It had been Richard's idea, a place of peace amid the corporate chaos. Employee wellness programs had become a cornerstone of their new business model. I received a letter from my father yesterday, Richard said quietly, breaking their comfortable silence. Sarah reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. What did it say? The usual threats and manipulation attempts, but this time... He paused, squeezing her hand. This time, they didn't affect me the way they used to. I actually felt sorry for him. That's growth, Sarah said softly. You're not that scared little boy anymore. Richard nodded, his eyes distant. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, something to help children from abusive homes, especially those pressured into family businesses they want no part of. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, not the cutthroat businessman his father had tried to create, but someone who wanted to prevent others from experiencing the same pain he had. As summer approached, their reputation in the business community began to shift. The skepticism that had greeted their partnership gave way to curiosity, then admiration. Local business magazines featured their story, highlighting their commitment to ethical practices and employee welfare. One warm evening, as they worked late in Sarah's office, she found herself reflecting on their journey. Do you remember that first meeting? She asked. When you offered to save my company? Richard looked up from his laptop, smiling. How could I forget? You looked like you wanted to throw me out the window. I did, Sarah admitted with a laugh. I was so angry, so sure you were just like your father. But you proved me wrong, Richard. You proved everyone wrong. He moved to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. We proved them wrong together. You gave me the strength to break free from my father's influence, to become my own person. Their companies continued to grow, but not in the aggressive, predatory way of the past. Instead, they focused on sustainable growth, community involvement, and employee satisfaction. The city began to take notice. Small businesses sought their mentorship. Other corporations started implementing similar policies. Richard's efforts to make amends for his past actions went beyond business. He reached out to former employees who had been unfairly terminated, offering compensation and, when possible, new positions. He donated to causes that supported ethical business practices and corporate accountability. Sarah found herself falling more deeply in love with him each day. The man who had once represented everything she hated had become her strongest ally, her closest confidant, and her partner in every sense of the word. One particularly successful day, after closing a major deal with an environmentally conscious tech firm, they stood together on the roof garden. The setting sun painted the city skyline in shades of gold and pink. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Sarah said, leaning against the railing. Richard stood behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "For the better, I hope?" "Definitely for the better," she replied, turning to face him. "We've built something real here, Richard. Something good." "We have," he agreed, his eyes soft with emotion. "And we're just getting started." Together, they had transformed their companies into models of corporate responsibility. They had proven that success didn't require crushing others. That power could be used to lift people up rather than tear them down. Most importantly, they had found strength in each other, a partnership built on trust, understanding, and love. The city stretched out before them, a landscape of possibilities. They had faced down their demons, weathered the storms of public opinion, and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, standing side by side, their shared vision guiding them forward. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Sarah and Richard remained on the rooftop, their silhouettes merging into one. They had rewritten their story, transforming a tale of revenge and hatred into one of redemption and love. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their past. The Grand Plaza Hotel buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of the city's most influential business leaders gathered for the annual Business Excellence Awards. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegant ballroom, where tables draped in white linen stretched as far as the eye could see. Sarah Maxwell smoothed down her navy blue evening gown, her heart racing. She felt Richard's reassuring presence beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. He looked distinguished in his perfectly tailored black suit, but it was the warmth in his eyes that made her smile. "Ready?" he whispered. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." The crowd's chatter died down as they made their way to the podium. Sarah couldn't help but notice the difference in how people looked at them now. Gone were the suspicious glances and whispered criticisms. Instead, she saw genuine smiles and looks of admiration. Richard cleared his throat, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Sarah and I are honored to be here tonight, not just as individual business leaders, but as partners who have learned that the greatest achievements come through collaboration, not competition." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "Many of you know our story. 2 years ago, we were enemies, trapped in a cycle of revenge and mistrust that our families had created. Today, we stand before you to announce something that would have seemed impossible back then." The room fell completely silent. Richard continued. "We're merging our companies to create Maxwell Gray Enterprises. Our vision is to build a corporation that prioritizes ethical business practices, employee welfare, and community development." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Sarah saw several people lean forward in their seats, clearly intrigued by this unexpected announcement. "This merger," Sarah added, "represents more than just a business decision. It's a testament to the power of forgiveness, growth, and the courage to choose a different path. We're committed to creating a company that serves as a model for responsible business practices." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched people rise to their feet. In the front row, she noticed several former employees who had suffered under the old regime, people they had since made amends with, clapping enthusiastically. As they moved through the crowd afterward, accepting congratulations and fielding questions, Sarah was struck by how genuine the support felt. Barbara Chen, a respected industry veteran who had once warned Sarah against trusting Richard, approached them with a warm smile. "I admit I was wrong about you too," Barbara said, clasping their hands. "What you've accomplished, it's given hope to so many people in this industry. You've shown that change is possible." Richard's expression softened. "Thank you, Barbara. That means more than you know." Later in the evening, as they shared a quiet moment by the terrace doors, Sarah watched the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked. Richard pulled her closer, his voice thick with emotion. "From you wanting to throw me out of your office to this, it's quite the journey." "We did it," Sarah said softly. "We really did it. We took all that darkness, all that pain, and turned it into something good." They watched as more guests approached, eager to discuss their vision for the future. The announcement had sparked exactly the kind of response they'd hoped for, not just acceptance, but genuine enthusiasm for a new way of doing business. As they continued to mingle, sharing their plans for community outreach programs and ethical business initiatives, Sarah could feel the energy in the room. They weren't just building a company, they were creating a movement. The merger of Maxwell Gray Enterprises would stand as proof that redemption was possible, that the sins of the past didn't have to define the future. The evening wound down, but the excitement lingered in the air. Their announcement had marked more than just a business merger. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the possibility of change. Sarah and Richard had transformed their story from one of vengeance to one of redemption, and in doing so, they had inspired an entire community to believe in second chances. The spring air carried the scent of fresh flowers as Sarah stood before the full-length mirror in her bridal suite. Her white gown sparkled in the morning light, and her eyes glistened with happy tears. Just 2 years ago, she would have never imagined this day possible, marrying Richard Gray, the man she once blamed for her family's downfall. Outside, the cathedral buzzed with excitement. Guests from both families, once bitter enemies, now mingled freely in the courtyard. Sarah watched through the window as Richard's cousins helped her aunt arrange flowers at the entrance. The sight warmed her heart. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," came a voice from the doorway. It was her mother, holding a small velvet box. "I have something for you." Inside lay her grandmother's pearl necklace, a family heirloom that had graced 3 generations of Maxwell brides. As her mother fastened the pearls around her neck, Sarah caught glimpses of the arriving guests through the window. Business leaders, community members, and family friends, all here to witness not just a wedding, but a symbol of healing and hope. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of both families' traditions. When Sarah walked down the aisle, she saw Richard waiting at the altar, his eyes full of love and wonder. The city's most prominent figures filled the pews, but in that moment, she only saw him. Their vows echoed through the cathedral, promises of love and partnership that meant so much more given their complicated history. As they exchanged rings, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The past that once haunted them both had transformed into the foundation of something beautiful. The celebration afterward was joyous, filled with laughter, tears, and countless toasts to new beginnings. Former rivals shared tables and stories, while children from both families played together in the garden. It was everything they had hoped for, a true celebration of love's power to heal and unite. The evening before their wedding, Sarah and Richard found themselves in the quiet solitude of his penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below, like scattered diamonds, a perfect backdrop for reflection. Sarah leaned against the railing, her engagement ring catching the soft glow of the outdoor lanterns. "It's hard to believe where we were 2 years ago," Richard said softly, standing beside her. His normally confident demeanor had given way to something more vulnerable. "I remember that first meeting in the boardroom. You looked at me with such hatred." Sarah turned to face him, her expression tender. "I was so angry then. I thought you were the villain in my story." She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I never imagined you were fighting your own battles." Richard squeezed her hand gently. "My father's manipulation ran deeper than anyone knew. But meeting you—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Meeting you gave me the strength to finally stand up to him." "We both lost so much," Sarah acknowledged, thinking of her uncle's betrayal and the scandal that had rocked both their families. "But somehow we found something greater." The cool evening breeze rustled through Sarah's hair as Richard pulled her closer. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the pain my family caused yours," he promised. "No," Sarah said firmly, placing her hand on his chest. "We're beyond that now. What matters is what we've built together. Look at how we've transformed both companies. Look at how our families have healed." Richard's eyes softened as he gazed at his bride-to-be. "I never thought I deserved this kind of happiness," he admitted. "After everything that happened." "That's what love does," Sarah interrupted, her voice full of emotion. "It helps us forgive others and ourselves. It gives us the courage to start again." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, taking in the peaceful night and the promise of tomorrow. The journey that had brought them here hadn't been easy, but every struggle had led them to this moment. "Thank you," Richard whispered, "for seeing past who I was to who I could be." Sarah smiled, her heart full of gratitude for this unexpected love story. "Thank you for helping me turn my father's legacy into something even more beautiful than before." The city hummed softly below them, a reminder of the world they'd help reshape together. Tomorrow they would stand before their families and friends, but tonight belonged to just the two of them. A quiet moment of reflection before their new chapter began. The spring morning dawned bright and clear, perfect for a wedding that symbolized new beginnings. The Maxwell family estate's garden had been transformed into an enchanted setting, with white roses and delicate orchids adorning every arch and trellis. Sarah stood before the antique mirror in her childhood bedroom, her wedding gown catching the morning light. The ivory silk cascaded elegantly to the floor, simple yet stunning, much like the love story it represented. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her veil, remembering the long journey that had brought her to this moment. Through the window she could see guests gathering in the garden. Former business rivals now sat together, chatting and laughing. The sight of their unified families brought tears to her eyes. 2 years ago, she never would have believed this day possible. The ceremony began as soft violin music filled the air. Richard stood at the altar, his usually stern expression replaced with one of pure joy. As Sarah walked down the aisle on her brother's arm, their eyes met and held. In that moment, all their shared struggles, the conspiracy, the betrayals, the painful revelations, faded away. Their vows were deeply personal, reflecting both their professional partnership and their profound love. Richard's voice was steady as he promised to stand beside her through every challenge, to support her dreams, and to love her unconditionally. Sarah's voice wavered with emotion as she pledged her trust, her partnership, and her heart to the man who had once been her greatest adversary. "Today, we're not just merging our lives," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong. "We're proving that love can heal even the deepest wounds." As they exchanged rings, the golden bands gleaming in the sunlight, the significance wasn't lost on anyone present. These rings represented more than marriage. They symbolized the complete circle of their journey, from enemies to allies to soulmates. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause. Hand in hand, Sarah and Richard walked back down the aisle, their steps perfectly in sync. Sarah's heart felt full to bursting with contentment and joy. They had faced every obstacle together and emerged stronger. Now they were ready to begin their greatest adventure yet, building a life together. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.